Welcome back to Craigers, your boy Choco. Let's here with another reaction. Today we are doing the discovery that proves humans are absolutely insane. I am him. Listen to me, boy. I'm not okay, bro. Whatever. Anyways, let's get started with this react.
Are a very odd bunch. So much so that I don't think it's crazy to say that we are by far the weirdest and most deranged animals on the entire planet. And pretty much anywhere you look, there is evidence that reflects this.
Bro's hitting that.
So it's not really that shocking that over the years, various paleontological and archaeological finds have been made, which can only be summed up as horrifying or extremely bizarre. But like everything, there's levels to this.
YouTube's audio is kind of loud. Might want to turn it down. My bad, bro.
With only some being so memorable that even the researchers who made the discovery are left a bit scared, bewildered, or in awe. And a single find that managed to give scientists all three of these emotions was the discovery of a mass grave in Italy, or rather, in Acropolis, which contained the bodies of over 200 individuals that dated to over 1500 years ago. Now typically, finding hundreds of bodies would be the most alarming part of such a discovery.
No, I feel like that'd be kind of normal. It's probably like after like a battle or something.
But not this time. Instead, what really grabbed their attention was just a single specimen, a middle-aged man dubbed TUS 380, who had seemingly died between the age of 40 to 50 and had suffered a very rare kind of trauma seldomly seen.
Look at your basement. What? What?
An amputation
People are now home at my house. Anyways, let's continue.
to his mid-forearm. Given the age of his remains, this procedure, if voluntary, would have happened under zero anesthesia, with a bone saw, no antibiotics, and without painkillers after, which is a strong first sign that this dude was absolutely metal.
It probably wasn't a bone saw. They probably just used like a big axe and just axed it off.
But here's the thing. He was also literally metal, as where his stump would be, instead laid a full-on iron knife, pointing in the direction away from the arm and signifying that we had ancient
That's really cool. I'm not gonna lie.
cyborgs before GTA 6. And this knife was by no means for show, as another wild observation the team made was that he lived with this upgrade for many, many years, and showed signs of having endured extreme biomechanical forces. In other words, he used a stabby hand very often. And one
So he was an absolute menace to society.
pretty grim sign of this was that a good chunk of his teeth were literally grinded down to the pulp cavities, a result of having to constantly fasten his knife straps as they would loosen or go undone. And another good sign that whoever this guy was extremely hardcore, as literally grinding down your teeth to nothingness through overuse has gotta hurt. And he did so apparently while getting frequent bacterial infections and dental abscesses. On top of this, his shoulder also became a sign of the knife's usage, as the bones shifted in a way suggesting that he frequently held his arm in an unnatural position. And then, just in case you needed some more proof, the amputation site itself also showed evidence of intense friction, likely occurring as he wielded his metallic arm. Question is though, what was the knife being used for? And the answer may have been tied to who he was, as he belonged to
Are we dumb? Battles, bro.
the Germanic group of people known as the Lombards. And even for ancient times, these guys
Look what we got.
Well, it's not in. Dude, every.
Studio.
Look,
Diamond Arts.
Kanye's top 10, every single one has a fucking billion.
Yeah.
That one has like a billion something. I can't believe you never heard that song.
Isn't it cool?
Yeah.
Where?
I thought maybe it'd feel. Oh. Yeah, that is pretty cool.
What are you doing?
Reacting to videos. Want to say hi?
Can I see myself? How do you see?
There. Here, wait.
Ew.
It won't let me. Anyways, this is my sister, guys. To the 3 people in here right now. There was more, but then I didn't know what to react to after like 10 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah.
What are you watching?
The discovery that proves humans are absolutely insane.
Oh, that's cool.
I got scared earlier while y'all were gone and I yelled through my headset. Like, I'll show you it later, but
I don't know if I want you to.
I genuinely freaked out. But, alright.
Well, being here, I think I'm gonna start one of these.
Okay. Are we having anything for dinner?
We already ate dinner.
Y'all didn't give me anything?
We had date night.
Y'all didn't give me anything? Like, you didn't even ask.
There's still a tuna in there. You never ate it.
Fine.
You can save that for tomorrow and eat something else.
Okay. Let's get back to work. No dinner for broski. Yeah, no dinner for me. I'm gonna starve.
Guys had cooked up quite the reputation, being known for their aptitude of war and conflict, and leading to the idea that TUS-380 utilized the knife arm in self-defense and battles, which is where he perhaps had originally lost the arm in the first place. So clearly, this was one badass human with an insanely high pain tolerance, and ultimately, despite his setback, he may have ended up overcoming the odds and winning life. Because as mentioned, he likely died around 50, which
yeah, that's like really high for like, wait, when was this, like 2,000 years ago or something like that? That's like a really high age for this time period.
Was relatively old for the time, with the current thought being that natural causes took him out. Now, a peaceful ending to a tumultuous life is something which sadly cannot be said for another much more ancient find, which revolved around a single shin bone. This fossil came out of the Turkana region in Kenya and was dated to 1.45 million years ago. In other words, we are not dealing with a Homo sapien here, but scientists could tell that it, without a doubt, belonged to an ancient relative of ours. But so far, we haven't been able to pinpoint the exact species, as multiple humans lived in the region at the time. And
You're right.
Certainly does not help that this bone, as multiple
Are we serious, my brother? Are we serious, my brother? They got some long horns.
Humans lived in the region at the time. And it certainly does not help that this bone is beyond heavily damaged. Damage, which by the way, seems to have been caused by other hominins. And this wasn't your average kind of trauma, being very deliberate and precise, with 9 incision marks ranging across the shin bone that traced where in life the victim's flesh and muscles would have been nestled, and leading to the disturbing realization that scientists had stumbled upon the oldest evidence of a butchered and defleshed human, which in
So they ate, bro. So we were cannibals even back then. So that honestly makes more sense. When was the last time somebody was convicted of being a cannibal? Here, wait. When was the last time someone was convicted to being a cannibal? I have AI tell us real quick. Come on, AI, lock in. 2021? That's crazy. Wait, what? Wow, 2021.
turn screams
That's
cannibalism.
crazy.
And here's
So this has been happening for like millions of years.
the other disturbing part of this find. Just like how we don't
Oh my god.
know who this bone specifically belonged to, we also don't know who ended up killing and subsequently eating them. After all, multiple species were coexisting, and perhaps, apparently not so peacefully, leading to the grim possibility that maybe it wasn't the most abnormal thing back then to snack on your friendly neighborhood hominid cousins. It would also be quite on brand for the region, as water sources nearby seemingly fluctuated quite intensely, meaning that droughts would have disrupted the amount of available food sources. And though there have been other discoveries that have competed for the title of the oldest evidence of cannibalism, for now, this shin bone comes out on top, given how straightforward it is. Definitely a bone chiller, pun intended.
The beach is the only place where they get along. Now imagine them.
Although, while mysteries around it remain, it's not exactly super perplexing, and definitely not as confusing as the Rising Star Cave. The name of this place alone is pretty cool, but trust me, the story gets even cooler, or perhaps crazier. This cave is located in the Malmani Dolomites of South Africa, and has only been on modern human radars for a short time, first being mentioned in the 1980s, when it was explored and roughly mapped out by a caving team. However, not much of it ended up being thoroughly detailed, as they quickly realized that it was a deceptively complex cave system filled with many hazards. But eventually, given that it was a cave and located in the cradle of humankind, it was re-examined by an anthropological team, who by sheer luck alone discovered a chamber, now dubbed the Naledi Chamber. And this area held something remarkable: human bones. And not just a couple, thousands of them, over 1,500 to be exact, which together represented 15 individuals who varied in gender and age, with both infants and elders being amongst the pile.
It was probably like, like the catacombs. It's probably just like a form of a catacomb, just before like they actually became catacombs.
And this range immediately made it the richest assemblage of associated hominin fossils ever unearthed in Africa, a remarkable thing on its own. But here's the odd part: the bones should really not have been there. You see, to reach the chamber in which they were found, you had to overcome some ridiculously hard obstacles, including navigating tens of meters or feet of unlit passages, wiggling through a narrow area which was so tight that only the thinnest people can pass it, and only again when you're in a position akin to the Superman pose. And if you somehow made it past here, you're still not done, because then you'd be forced to scale a jagged steep slope before fitting through another tight passage, and then finally descend down a 12-meter or 49-foot vertical chute. So yeah, not easy. But hey, if you somehow survived this and made it through, well, congrats. You finally just reached the entrance of the chamber, which all goes to show that you don't end up here with a lot of deliberate effort. And originally, the simple explanation was that flooding had swept the already dead individuals into the cave and then into the chamber.
Yeah.
However, studies in the site sediment revealed that it had never been flooded, and that the bodies had been put there over a long period of time, not just in a single event. So this revelation led to the new, bit unsettling thought that maybe a man-eater had been responsible for this whole mess, as it definitely would not have been the first time an animal dragged humans into a cave. Yet, the team didn't really believe this, seeing that of all the bones, only one didn't belong to humans, instead belonging to an owl. And because no animal targets humans so exclusively, and considering that the bones actually had no signs of predation, scientists soon crossed this idea off the list of possibilities. And in fact, the bones did not just have no damage from predation, they also didn't really show any damage at all, something which just further confused researchers, as it strongly implied that the bodies had not been dropped down the massive vertical chute, but rather had been put down gently. But that just brings the further question then of what would be insane enough to pile bodies in an extremely remote, difficult to access part of a cave.
Like the Native Americans, how they used to bury their loved ones in sacred areas. I'm telling you, it's a sacred gravesite. It's a gravesite.
That is so hard to reach that only humans with modern
They didn't want people disturbing their relatives after they've passed.
equipment have been able to do it. And the answer is that it was likely the very same thing that the researchers found: the humans, or rather, to be more specific, an entirely new species of humans, now dubbed Homo naledi. Even today, Homo naledi are a group only known through their Rising Star Cave. But thanks to the sheer quantity of bones, we do actually have a fair idea of what they were like anatomically, being both shorter and lighter than us, while also possessing a smaller relative brain size and a body more adapted for arborealism than other Homo species. It's currently believed that they existed between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago, making them one of our youngest relatives. And while most believe they did have proficiency with tools, thanks to their similar cranial structure, no one thinks they were rocking any advanced climbing gear or navigation tech, and thus leading many to still wonder how on earth did they reach the chamber and whilst carrying bodies at that. And the answer is that we simply don't know. Now, some have stated that they likely navigated the caves with fires, while others have made the hypothesis that they made markings which acted as waypoints. But all studies which have sought to explain the how have ultimately been criticized. And in the end, even the idea that the Naledi put the bodies there themselves is still a debated hypothesis. Heck, there are even claims that while the fossils are definitely Naledi, maybe it was other Homo species that put them there, with one idea being that long after they died, it was actually us modern humans that buried the bodies in the cave, which if true though, would honestly be way more odd. And something else which would be odd is if you made it this far without dropping a sub or a like.
Yeah, guys, go follow what's his name? Extinct Zoo. Go follow him if y'all want more
Like,
videos like this.
no professional climbing gear
More reacting
required.
videos like this.
Now, maybe it's a me thing, but I think deliberately burying a body in a narrow cave is downright insane. And while I am sure at least some would disagree, I think what everyone could agree on, being not normal, is what scientists found at a remote lake in the Trishul Massif of India. This shallow, narrow glacial lake is formally named Rupkund, but to the locals, it's earned the creepy nicknames the Mystery Lake and the Skeleton Lake. And why? Well, simply because around this shallow pool are hundreds and hundreds of bodies. Well, skeletons, possibly numbering more than 800 individuals at that.
Wow.
And this isn't your typical necropolis or graveyard, because these bodies were not put there deliberately. Rather, they are strewn about, suggesting that scores of individuals have been killed around this tiny lake. Back in the early 1940s, when the site was first discovered, British authorities feared the worst, thinking that these casualties represented a secret invasion by the Japanese into India. But upon further examination, they concluded that while these were definitely Homo sapien remains, the bodies were far too old to be an invading force, which was corroborated by the items they located among the carnage, which included wooden artifacts, iron spearheads, leather slippers, and rings.
Really cool.
And so obviously, researchers were extremely perplexed as to how so many people had died here at once. And one clue that might have held the answer were the bodies themselves, as due to the surrounding temperature and altitude of the lake, many of the victims were well preserved, in some cases even containing flesh. And what they noticed was that a lot of the individuals were all killed by the same thing, a large, round object. To be specific, on the upper bodies and heads, a common injury which was found was blunt force, that appeared to be in the shape of a fallen object, like a stone or a large piece of ice. And interestingly enough, when talking with the nearby villages, scientists heard about a local legend, which told of an ancient king who, along with his family and entourage, had been killed by a large hailstorm when trying to pass through the mountain. And so given this loose account, plus the actual injuries they found on the bodies, the team concluded that Skeleton Lake had in fact seen a massive hailstorm, and therefore resulting in a large number of deaths. Case closed. Or so they thought. Because while hail-like injuries were a theme, not all the skeletons had injuries associated with blunt force trauma and hail. But to be honest, this was the lesser of the contradicting evidence which came forth, with the bigger issue being that later on, another team ended up testing more specimens, which revealed that the dead did not represent just one group, but at least 3 different ones, all from different times and regions. Now, 2 of them seem to have died here around 1,000 years ago, within a few decades of each other, and showed typical South Asian ancestry and Southeast Asian ancestry, respectively, while the third group was from a very unexpected region, mainland Greece and Crete. And these outliers had also not died so long ago, with estimates being as recent as just 200 years ago, making more than a few wonder if the lake
Isn't that like Rome? Like that
is even safe to visit nowadays. And obviously we could answer this if we knew what killed each group, but alas, we do not. And for now it's considered a mystery. Most still think a hailstorm is what killed at least a few of them, but 3 separate hail events in this one remote location, which were deadly enough to take out humans, seems highly unlikely, especially when combined with the lack of clear injuries. And the whole thing is even more bizarre when you realize that the identified groups came from the analysis of just 38 individuals. So in other words, who knows just how many groups fell victim to Skeleton Lake?
True.
There's a Harbor Freight store in your neighborhood. And the thing about neighborhoods,
So for now, the mystery remains. But mystery does not always equal the spookiest. And something which I personally would feel even more uncomfortable around may have been something actually created out of good intentions. Plastered human skulls.
No.
In the 1930s, around the Levant, and especially around the city of Jericho, researchers stumbled upon a frightening object that resembled a human head. It had been constructed through multiple layers of wrapped plaster that were painted and adorned with seashells in order to give the impressions of eyes, hair, and skin. A bit unsettling for sure, yet nothing compared to
Does that have eyelashes on it? What the heck?
when they actually pried open these plasters, as within these plastered mockeries were real heads, or at least what was left of them. In total, over 20 heads were found, which dated to between 10,000 and 8,000 years ago, and primarily represented adult men, although a few were children and women too. Now what's disturbing, beyond the whole head and plaster part, is that the jaw bones had all been removed, and that each of these heads had been placed underneath what would have been homes. An interesting place to store heads, no doubt. and this prompted great interest in why people had created them in the first place, with one of the original ideas being that the artists, if you want to call them that, had killed whoever these heads belonged to, and then taken them as trophies, with the plastering process being a bit like what's seen with shrunken heads. In other words, a ritual of sorts. However, in recent times, a much more wholesome hypothesis has emerged, which is that because the skulls were buried underneath people's houses, they might have represented one of the earliest forms of burial practices in civilization. Additionally, it's been unveiled that these skulls did not remain locked away, but were periodically handled over long periods of time. So long, in fact, that while they were likely started as known deceased individuals, they eventually became just known as an ancestor to whoever was handling them, which was perhaps too much of a commitment, as after a 2,000-year window, the Jericho-plastered skulls seems to have vanished from existence, with only one remnant being left behind in the culture, a mythical tale of all things, which was discovered in the region thousands of years later. And it goes like this. A mortal. What does he get in the end? What does a mortal finally get? Glaze poured on his head, lime on top of his skull. Pretty somber for something possibly meant to celebrate ancestors. But honestly, unsettling worship just seemed to be the trend back in the day. And there's actually a way more disturbing example of hypothetical worship. Let me introduce you to the human jigsaw. And yes, it's just as bad as it sounds. As opposed to the Levant, this brutal find came out of Scotland, where near South Uist, in Scotland's Outer Hebrides,
James, bro, was you the one who did this?
4 Bronze Age skeletons were located. Like the Jericho skulls, they were found within ancient houses, with the main difference being that they were above the floor, not beneath, and were lying in pretty normal manners, indicating that they hadn't died in any noteworthy way. And for the most part, they were considered routine finds. Until, that is, under further examination, a contradiction was identified. One of the bodies, a presumed female, turned out to be not all female. To be exact, most of the body was, yet the skull was male, and so were some of the other parts. And in a further twist, those other parts turned out to have come from really 2 males, resulting in the stark realization that this skeleton was actually a combination of 3 different individuals. And lo and behold, the other specimens turned out to be a mashup of different people
Jason Voorhees?
too. Pretty gnarly. And it only gets worse, as another find was that these jigsaw humans had been, well, pickled, essentially, with the bodies showing signs of demineralization, something that happens when you stew a human in an extremely acidic environment. And conveniently nearby was a peat bog, which, as it just so happens, contained the necessary amount of acidity, leading to the idea that they had been in the peat bog for quite some time. However, as mentioned, they were not found in the bog itself, which created just more questions, as this meant that someone had purposely stitched multiple bodies together, dipped it in a peat bog, waited oh so very patiently, and then placed the final product in their house. And just to shake things up a tad more, radiocarbon dating found that the bodies were hundreds of years older than the actual building. So what does this all mean? Well, the most likely answer, according to the researchers, is that this was an extreme form of ancestral worship, where for hundreds of years a Bronze Age community in Scotland kept deceased relatives above ground entwined in a jigsaw monstrosity, which they also seemed to pass down and add to through time. In other words, more bodies were added as people died. Of course, there is also again the more grim possibility that these were not an example of ancestor worship, but rather were trophies. But given just the sheer amount of effort that went into making them, most think that's probably not the case. And given the known instances of violence from ancient times, this does seem to track, as they weren't exactly careful and meticulous with their fallen foes' remains. And honestly, even compared to some of the messed up things that have happened in today's times, I'd have to say that ancient violence shows to have been quite a bit more deranged. After all, there was a whole period, the Neolithic, where people seemed to be all about unusual cruel killings, with multiple large sites even being found throughout Eurasia. In fact, so many brutal discoveries are known of that I even made a full video on it, so go check that out if that sounds interesting. Additionally, due to the period's notoriety, researchers have even become a bit desensitized to Neolithic murders, with very few cases of violence outside of this time being able to compete. But there is one location in the US that actually comes pretty darn close, with it also representing a potential meltdown of an entire society. Now, our story here begins in southwestern Colorado, where back in the day an ancient culture was known to reside, now known as the basket maker Pueblo culture. For thousands of years they lived in the region, and were known to inhabit pit houses, which simply put
I wonder how they learned how to build stuff like that, like the little hill stuff. I wonder how they learned.
is a house built in the ground and used for shelter. And it was in a few of these structures and their surroundings that an extremely horrific scene was discovered. An entire community wiped from the face of the earth. There were at least 24 bodies in total, but it was 7 in particular that grabbed people's attention, as they were beyond destroyed. Their bones had been cleaned of flesh, roasted, and cracked open, while the skulls were scorched, smashed,
They were eaten.
and had scoop marks showing signs of people fishing the brains out, all evidence that a mass cannibalistic feast had gone down. And this was no simple attack, as the site was not only abandoned, but also defiled, suggesting that whoever lived there did not take captives, but rather were the captives, or victims, being attacked, killed, and then eaten within their very own homes. And evidence beyond the actual bodies included blood-stained tools and cooking pots. In other words, they may have been cooked in the very same pots that they used to make supper. It also seems that whoever cannibalized the victims had absolutely zero remorse or pity for the dead, as perhaps the worst discovery of it all was the coprolite, meaning in this case, human feces, within the cold ashes of one of the pit house's hearth, suggesting that one of the attackers deliberately defiled the house after the gruesome events unfolded. And given that cooking
He dookied in their house after he killed them?
hearths were integral parts of this culture, this act could be viewed in some ways as the ultimate insult. And honestly, given the sheer brutality of everything, there was actually some initial pushback on the findings, claiming that perhaps a foreign culture had invaded or that the bodies weren't actually cannibalized, with the damage having come from other means. Yet unfortunately, this turned out to be some wishful thinking, as one damning piece of evidence came to light, and that was the coprolite itself, as after testing, scientists found the presence of myoglobin, human myoglobin.
Hi, I'm JT and I made Result Hunter, the search engine for conservatives. Let me just tell you what it does. First of
And that doesn't just end up in your stool unless you've been gnawing on someone, mainly someone's flesh, as myoglobin is not found in most organs or vessels. Furthermore, whoever did this disrespectful deed in the hearth must have been a serious cannibal, since opposed to other coprolites known in the region, this one was all myoglobin, meaning
So all he or she was eating was human?
that for 12 hours before defecating, human was the only thing this unknown individual was snacking on. No veggies, no fruits, nada, just straight human. But here's the thing though, while this example is the most brutal one in the locality, it was actually just one piece of a larger puzzle. As out of the blue, researchers noted that the basket maker Pueblo culture had at some point gone from pretty chill to straight killing and eating other humans, a bit similar to what we've seen in other Neolithic cultures. And actually, it has one of the highest rates of suspected cannibalism and violence of any known ancient culture, with one study finding 72 sites with signs of cannibalism, 38 of them being definitive. And then on top of that, another analysis of 870 skeletons found that more than 8% bore cannibalism marks, while rates of violence were even higher. And given how this gnarly episode of violence kinda just sprung out of nowhere, many have wondered why. And though debates remain, one idea which has emerged as the favorite answers this mystery through 2 important coincidences. The first being that around the same time, roughly 850 years ago, the Chaco system, which essentially was the heart of this culture, mysteriously collapsed and disappeared. And then the second coincidence was that severe droughts had struck the land after periods of plentiful rain.
I've realized, like, a lot of the cannibalism stuff has been caused because of droughts and lack of water. And the lack of water causes lack of animals, causing them to have to go up against their own kind. But, I mean, if I was in this day and age and I was starving, I would eat somebody too.
And when you combine all this together, you get a land so desolate due to droughts that society essentially slowly imploded, with the cannibalism reflecting the unimaginable final days, where people turned on each other just to survive. So yeah, pretty messed up. But let me just remind you, these remains, stories, and evidence is just what we've found so far. There are undoubtedly untold amounts of mysteries, brutalities, and oddities just waiting to be discovered. But hey, on that cheerful note, if you somehow made it through all of this without needing therapy, congrats. You're made of stronger stuff than those Jericho skulls. And if you want some more reasons that'll make you question humanity's sanity, I've got a whole video on the Neolithic period's violence, which I mentioned earlier, though fair warning, it does not get any less disturbing. Anyways, thanks for watching.
Alright guys, shout out to the boys Exotic Zoo. I'm gonna leave a like on that. Well, that's gonna be into this react of the discovery that proved humans are absolutely insane. If y'all enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And anyways, I love y'all. See y'all in the next one.